So first, Andy, let me say, I really do appreciate you lending your platform to voices for African American men and women who, by and large, have had these conversations for a long time outside of the professional workplace, or even if it were in a professional setting amongst ourselves, and we haven't felt comfortable or been invited to share our full experience with our colleagues or other members of the advertising and media industry. But to your point, it is now at the forefront, and it is hard to ignore. But it takes folks with a platform and a diverse set of listeners, subscribers, and followers to get these messages out and put at the forefront the importance of having these difficult conversations. So thank you for your part in that. First, uh, when I show up at work and in my over 2 decades of a career in media and advertising, I show up first as a hard worker, as a man. But when I show up at work, indubitably, people see me as a black man, right? And uh, through no hard work or fault of my own, I'm 6'3" and 240 pounds, so a large black man at that. And oftentimes that was initially the reception I got. It was, oh, did you play ball in school? The assumption that I was an athlete, and I pretended to be an athlete in college. But really, what got me in the door was that I was a journalism major who'd been working in advertising as an account executive since the age of 19. Unlike so many of our peers, particularly at that time, my degree is in advertising, and I knew at an early age that this was the field I wanted to be in. But as I looked around the industry and as I started my career, I did not see many people who looked at me, who looked like me at all. And naturally, what you did was that you gravitated to the few mentors who were available or people who were able to avail themselves. And I was very fortunate to have, and I know you've talked to some of my colleagues and some of my peers who got their starts at the same places that I did. Uh, but during my time at BET, I had a group of men in Louis Carr, Raymond Goldborn, Alvin Bowles, amongst others, who showed me the way to be a hard worker, to understand and be very conscious of who you were as a black man in this industry, but to use that as a tool while you were aware to set yourself apart and make sure that you left a mark that was that of somebody of quality and character. But that's not to say that there aren't obstacles that exist in the marketplace, right? And increasingly conversations have been around not just around Black Lives Matter or people of color, but the idea of bringing your whole self to work. And what we know is, for some groups, that's just more difficult and challenging than others. And if we're asking our peers to bring their whole selves to work, what we find is the separations between us don't start and stop at the door of our offices. Too many of us live in neighborhoods or go to places of worship or belong to clubs and organizations where there's not diverse representation. So it's very hard for a hiring manager or a manager of people to turn on the lens of diversity just at the workplace, right? So this speaks to a larger challenge we have as a country, right? As Americans. And as Americans, we should want to be better. We've moved beyond the conversation of a melting pot. This really is more of, a diverse set of individuals who celebrate and recognize one another's differences and can establish that and say, we are different. Let's find our commonalities and let's not allow our differences to divide us. And I think that's where we should really start. I've been, like I said, in this industry for over 2 decades. And for the first time, I have non-African Americans, celebrating and recognizing Juneteenth. Well, that's a holiday that's over 130 years old. And in the Black community, we've celebrated this for a long time. The problem is that there's been a lack of education. And I think now that folks are aware that there's a different and parallel conversation taking place, there's no problem with ignorance. But now that you're not ignorant, now that the information is not kept from people, the idea is that we should have open and honest discussions about why we haven't made this information available, why it hasn't been recognized, why this is not taught in schools, why we've not been comfortable having these conversations at home or in places of business, and change the dialogue. I have absolute hope, and I am hopeful that as a country, as an industry, we can move forward. First, let me start by recognizing what got us to this point where we're having the dialogue, right? It started, if you look back some years ago, with the death of Trayvon Martin, and it seemingly almost every month there was another unarmed black man or black woman being shot or arrested or killed either by law enforcement or private citizens who just were acting on fear of people who were not black. But what's really talked about amongst my friend set is when you look at an African American man who's bird watching in Central Park, what's so much closer to home. I'm based in New York, and it it's so close for me to go to Central Park, after work or on the weekends with my family. And what can you do that's more docile and calming than bird watching? And here you had a gentleman who had worked in media, worked for Marvel Comics, and was an avid bird watcher, and asked somebody to follow the rules of the park. And that woman chose to weaponize her privilege, and she was quite aware of what she was doing in calling the police because she had a disagreement with somebody, and that could have ended much differently. And that's where my fear lies, in that the reality that can happen anywhere between two professionals in a public park in New York City. But my hope is that, if you look at how and what's taking place in the streets, there are multiple stages of grieving. And I think what we saw was the outrage and the denial early on. And what's happening now is that folks are moving to a place of dialogue and openness, some recognition and understanding. But what I hope is that we don't move on, much like COVID. I hope we don't move on to business as usual. There can't be a rush back to things as they were before, right? Our eyes have been opened, and it's now left up to us to educate ourselves and find a place that we can work in comfort, but also in a shared effort to make sure that we make space for differences. And so my hope is, both for America and for the ad profession and media in general, is that we can recognize that there's underrepresentation of people in color. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say specifically women of color, in not just in the room, but at the table, to have a voice in the room where you're a decision maker. It's not just enough to attract people. And Jack Myers has done some interesting work in some studies. And let me actually give a shout out to some of the other folks who are using their platforms to push for diversity. Jack Myers has some strong research that shows we don't have a problem attracting people. Once people find out about media, specifically advertising, it's a very attractive field, right? You can make a good living and build a good career out of working advertising. Our challenge is retention. And that's the real question that we have to start to ask ourselves. If we're attracting good talent, then why are people not choosing to stay? And so when you walk into a boardroom, or when you walk into a conference room, or you go to a conference like CES, and you look around and you see that it's rather homogenous, that there's a ultimate lack of diversity, both age, gender, and specifically ethnicity, you have to assume one of three things. First, there's not enough talent, and we've proven that that's not true, right? Given the opportunity, you're going to attract great diverse talent, and there are some companies that are doing it very well. The second thought is that folks are choosing not to come to this industry, and I've already touched on that. If there's an opportunity to build a career and make a good living, why would somebody not want to come into media advertising? And there's other verticals, other industries that are doing that very well. And number three, the assumption is that we're actually getting that talent and not doing what we need to do to retain that talent. And I think there's efforts that need to be made on all three fronts if we're going to make real progress.